Hello, everyone. Ryan, Hassan, and Matt Nettleton here, creators of Embodied Processing. We wanted to create this video for you today to break down the EP flowchart, to give you a little bit of context around each of the steps. So in a short amount of time, we can explain to you the actual process and move through this chart really clearly. So the first step here is initial questions and session sheet. We'll just quickly touch on that. Basically, all we're doing is sitting down with the person before we actually even start the process and just have a bit of a chat and ask some questions around what we're going to be looking at today, what we're going to be investigating, what part we're going to be bringing up and working with somatically with the EP process. We then move into the resourcing section, within which we have three different options here. Matt, I'll throw over to you if you want to talk about the resourcing part.
Yeah. So the first part is just to develop attunement, to set some context and to sort of get to know each other, to sort of set the space that we're going to be doing the session in. And that's just the initial question and session sheet. I don't use a sheet, but everyone's free to do it how they choose to do it. But so the second part is the resourcing options. So once we start to develop that space, we can start to sink in or help our client or whoever we're working with sink into a place of safety. And the reason we do that is because the nervous system will heal when it's in a healing space, when it's safe to do so. So when a trauma or undigested life experience or some sort of emotion gets stuck in our systems where deficient beliefs are created, in those events, what happens is the stress cycle doesn't complete itself because it doesn't feel safe to do so. So what happens is that part or that stress response gets stuck and frozen in time. And the first part of this process is firstly developing that space, and it goes into part one where it's like we attune and we set the tone that this is a safe space for the body to heal itself. And so when we lay a resource, it's bringing in that part that was absent during the trauma, that wasn't there in that moment. And when we find a sense of safety, whether it's in a memory, we've got three options here, but there's actually an infinite amount of resources that we offer or encourage people to use. It's sort of like your fingerprint. You can find your own unique way of coming to safety. So we can come down and find safety in the body. So it might be, and safety can be a bit of a trigger word for some people. So it might be stability, it might be a sense of presence or support, groundedness, protective or protected. It depends on the person, will depend on what sort of language we want to use. But so it might, just for the purpose of this, let's just stick with safety. So it might be safety in the body. Yeah, my feet feel stable and safe. And so I can really explore those sensations, what that feels like to be here, to be safe. And explore how that feels in the body. What happens? Can I relax a little? Can my system relax? Can some of the tensions that sort of feel fearful just sort of soften into that? And we can explore what that sense of safety feels like. We can also bring in a memory or a place. So for some people, it might be a waterfall, or the beach. And we can just explore what happens in our body as we go to that place. What are the subtle changes that happen in my system, in the felt sense of my body, my belly, my chest, my shoulders, as I sort of sink into that imagined place. And, or we can use a memory, a memory of a time we went at the beach, or we can use our imagination. Or for someone, say, who has a more of a religious orientation, it may be the Divine Mother, or it may be Christ, or a saint, or a God, or if someone has those sort of tendencies to move towards those sort of things, and we could just imagine, say, Christ or an angel, holding us, and we can feel our system sort of relax into that. Like there's security there, there's a sense of safety, there's a sense of being held. And so then once we find that with a client, it's really important to explore what that feels like in the body, explore the felt sense of that. And once we've grounded into that, and I always get my clients to, on the exhale, just sink a little bit into that, because someone who especially has experienced more higher levels of trauma, relaxing can feel really, really threatening. if I relax, something's going to get me. It can feel, too threatening. And so this is why we can bring in these imagined images. We can bring in different parts of the body. We can bring in a resource to just help someone relax into that. And this is really important because later in the process, when someone's tipping into overwhelm, we can come back to resource. So we can pendulate back and move between the two. And so once that's been established, we bring in the anchor, and this is based on different modalities like neurolinguistic programming, etc., where they bring in a kinesthetic anchor. And so we can actually anchor it into any part of the body. I know in faster EFT, they grab the wrist as an anchor. We use that, but we also use one hand on the heart, one on the belly to help facilitate that sense of containing, of support, of safety. And again, it would depend on the person. Some people might not like that. It might trigger something different. One hand on the heart, one on the belly. It might trigger a time when they've been held down. And so we have to really know our client and understand what's happening with them within them via our attunement with them. But someone's got one hand on the heart, one on the belly, and we're resting in a resource. What happens is, I always say to clients, so just put that perfect amount of pressure so your system feels supported and contained by your hands. Then let's take a breath and anchor a sense of safety into this position. And what happens is the body starts to then associate this position with our hands, with safety. Sort of like, with infants, we can sort of support their neck. We support their neck as we hold them like that. If we get a lot of co-regulation that way later in life, if we can put our hand there, it can automatically trigger down-regulation of our nervous system because our body remembers the felt sense of someone's hand being there when we're young. So that's what we mean by kinesthetic anchor, is the body actually starts to associate, say, our hands being here, grabbing the wrist, our hand there. There's all these different sort of ways we can anchor it in. And then I always say, let's take a breath and set the intention to ground and anchor this felt sense into the body. And so that's the first step. And, sometimes I'll spend a long time doing that. It's not like I have to go through this whole sheet on it in one session. I might spend a whole session just anchoring and resourcing and helping a client to find that safe space.
Yeah, and it's so important that we start here with every session. Oftentimes when we see a client for the first time, we definitely want to go through this because we want to cultivate that sense of safety and start to, the first baby steps of building that resource. But then when we see them again and again for sessions, we want to go there again. Number one, because it helps ingrain that pathway of safety, which is so important. It's like we're continuing to water that tree. But also, people's resource can and generally will change over time. Now, their subjective feeling of safety won't change, but oftentimes the imagery that we use or they use will start to change over time. So we just need to be very, very aware of that. So we always get people to touch on that resource. And then that's just there as a resource for us as a practitioner as well. Whereas, we may not need to go there in the whole session, or we may need to go back to the resource 6 times, but it's there for us whenever someone starts getting really dysregulated or overwhelmed. So very, very important. And really the foundations of EP is that resourcing section. And so once we've got that solid resource and we've anchored it into the body, once again, in a safe place in the body, like Matt was saying, then we start to invite in the trigger, or as we call it, the orphaned part, or the split off part of our psyche or our being. And this is the part that we're going to be looking at and investigating that day. So this can be the part that was really triggered by something at work or in relationship recently. It can be the part of us that is terrified of conflict. It can be the part of us that's terrified of abandonment. Whatever we've uncovered that we're going to investigate, we can actually start to invite in that trigger or that orphaned part. And from there, we can ask the client, what does that part look like? What does that part feel like? And then we can go into the discerning of the emotion. And there we're starting to pull apart and working out what the most predominant emotion is around this particular orphaned part. For an example, we can have someone who's really fearful of conflict, and we invite in the part of them that's afraid of conflict, and we find out that the imagery or the feeling they get is being very hunched over, very protective, very submissive, and very scared. So we start to pull that apart and find out, and maybe the heart beats faster as well. We're really pulling out of the cognitive mind and going into the felt sense of what that trigger or that orphan part feels like in that moment. Okay. And this is where, a big part of EP, and the reason why we call it the bottom up, is because we start by that felt sense. And later on, we can make some cognitive understanding and learnings around it, but we need to understand what that part feels like. So we pull apart the predominant emotion or feeling around that. And then that's what we start to investigate further. Once again, we're going deeper and deeper into the felt sense. Once we've discerned that emotion, then we jump into finding origins. Do you want to talk about that, Matt?
Yeah, so finding origins is basically following the timeline, and we might ask some specific questions in this part. It's like, when's the first time this happened? Does this remind you of anything that happened in your life? Or if a certain person comes to mind that we're in a relationship currently, we might ask, does this person remind you of someone from your past? And, oh yeah, it reminds me of my dad or my mom or my big brother or something. And so what we're doing is finding the origin of that part, because a lot of the time, we're not experiencing the present moment. We're not experiencing our life as it is, or the people in our lives. We're experiencing projections from our past trauma. We're experiencing our trauma. It's like a loop going around in circles. And so finding the origins helps return back to that original memory, at that point in time that the stress cycle didn't complete, that we got stuck at a certain point, and we return to that time, and we can re-experience all the sensations and all the emotions and the stresses and all the locked survival stress in our system from a safe ground, from a safe container. And so finding origins, it's the part of the process basically where we follow the timeline back and hit that certain point.
Yeah. And we can, once again, we use that felt sense. So if we keep using the example of the conflict, fear and submissiveness, that has a certain feeling or flavor for that subjective person. But then this particular fear and submissiveness around conflict, that has an even more specific flavor. And we can ask that part and say, well, when was the first time we felt this particular feeling? And then we can start to get different memories, images of people and that kind of thing. And this is going to help us so much in finding the origins, because like Bessel van der Kolk says in his book, the body keeps the score. We can access these origins through the body much better than we can through the cognitive mind.
Yeah. And just, like on that topic, it's like the cognitive mind obviously has its uses, and it's, it's benefited us as a species enormously. But, that like we've neglected the felt sense and the body to a large degree, and that's had consequences. But, the body, it does remember, our whole body is shaped by our experience, the felt sense of our body, especially, our posture, the way we walk, the way our shoulders sit, all of that sort of stuff is shaped by our experience. If I'm exposed to threat over and over again, then my posture and the way I stand and the way I hold myself is going to show up in my body. My body's going to adapt and change and morph in order to survive in my environment. And these are the types of constrictions and sensations that we're working with. So we can find the original origin of that sensation or that posture or that constriction. And what we can do is help start to process that. And so the next part of the flowchart is working with and processing thoughts, images, and sensations. So for example, what might happen is I might get a flight response. So I might want to run, but I can't run. So, and this could be something as subtle as I am forced to go to a public event at school and talk at the school assembly, and my whole system wants to run. I might have a terror of talking in front of people, and there could be a origin of that, but just for this context, and my system wants to run, but I can't run because I'll get in trouble. And so then what happens is my system goes into freeze. So that sensation of wanting to run, that actually gets locked in the nervous system, that gets locked in my body. And so the body doesn't just remember the event, it remembers what it wanted to do as well. So the fact the legs wanted to run away and all that got overcoupled or held down by a freeze. I become frozen. And this happens over and over and over again, and my system just becomes more and more and more constricted. So processing sensation might look like processing that freeze response and then hitting the flight response underneath, or a fight response underneath. Maybe I'm really angry. Maybe I wanted to yell at my teachers and say, don't make me do this, but I'm not allowed to do that. So I go into freeze. Yeah. So it might be processing the anger that's underneath. It might be processing the fear that's underneath. And as we do that, we've got a bunch of techniques. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different techniques in order to help stay present and process these sensations and let the body move these sensations through. And it's important to realize as well, like the body has its own natural way of processing things, but we've got this part of us that controls and freezes and grasps and won't let the body do what it needs to do. So, what we've done is we've developed these 5 techniques, and they're just techniques to help move those sensations through. And, like this is the point where people can start to tip into overwhelm. Maybe not, like a lot of people don't, but some people do. That's the danger with this bit. But this is the reason we've stacked and anchored the resource at the very beginning of the session, because if someone says this is getting too much, or we can see by someone's body language that they're starting to loop, what I call loop, they start to get stuck, or they start to tip into overwhelm, or they can't contain their experience, then what we do there is we can pendulate back, and we can actually learn to cohabit a safe container whilst we feel the sensations and process them, and let the body sort of do its own cycle, complete the stress response. And so we've got these different techniques that come in here that can help process this.
Yeah, and I think you put it really well. It's we unconsciously hold that energy in there. So these techniques, and they can be used together. I use dimmer switch and rhythmic breathing together quite a lot, and we can merge these together. But what they are, I suppose, techniques of helping us get out of the way, or the client get out of their own way to an extent, so the body can start to process these emotions and these energies. And what happens once we do that, then successfully, we can start to find some resolution and completion. Now, we do this process because we need like Matt said, we need the body to understand that whatever happened is over. When we have these stuck emotions or energy in the past, part of our consciousness and part of our attention is always stuck back there. So there's no clear timeline that happened in the past and I'm here now. It's just, this is still happening to a certain extent. So what happens when we can successfully process a lot of these sensations and emotions, it gives us a solid timeline now that, okay, that part is over and I'm here now. So we've created a proper timeline through time and space. We can understand, hey, I'm not 5 anymore. I'm not 10 anymore. I'm a grown man or woman.
Yeah.
And that's and then after we've done that and the body has found a level of resolution or completion, then the cognitive mind can start to understand. And we can start make a different meaning or a reframing, whatever you want to call it, but we can start to re-encode whatever this event or memory was differently, because we dealt with it from the bottom up first. And you can see there, the flow chart's obviously going from the top to the bottom. And at this point that we're talking about now, we can go back up to discerning the emotion. Because what happens as we start to uncover a lot of these heavy energies from memories in our past, it can uncover other ones as well. I was using the example of conflict before, and we can have this really shut down response of fear and submissiveness, because whenever this origin was of the conflict, I needed to be that way. There was no other option. Now, after we go through the process of processing that, all of a sudden that might turn into anger, because I couldn't be angry back then, but angry was actually a healthy response. So we've gone from shutdown, whereas anger is a very mobilized or uprising energy. So we may then need to go through discerning the emotion of anger, origins, possibly the same event, maybe different. Then we work with the anger, okay, in the same way. Once again, we're working until we find that resolution or completion. After we've dealt with the anger, we can get to a place maybe of empowerment or sitting in my own power. I've worked through the fear and the shutdown, the anger and the activation. Now I'm just in a place of feeling quite powerful. And then that's how we can start to have this resolution or completion. And it's worth noting that, one of the things Matt and I talk about is we call it resolution and completion, but we never want someone to have a real idea, a solid idea of what the end of a session should look like, because it can look so many different ways. And yes, we may have this neat little package wrapped up and everything seems let go from that event in the past, but also it's an extremely successful session, even if we're just able to house an emotion a little bit better than what we were. Whereas instead of drowning in the ocean of that emotion, we can start to just tread water a little bit and start to house that a little bit better. that is also an extremely successful session, because as we keep moving down that path, then we can start to house stronger and stronger emotions and energies, which once again goes hand in hand with building our resource, or as Matt and I call it, building our capacity.
Yeah, it's learning to grow in our capacity to contain our experience, because like it's so often we get lost in our experience. But like you said, if at the end of a session my emotion's still present or my trigger's still present, but I'm not getting overwhelmed or hijacked, it's a good word for it, hijacked by it, I can actually contain it. I can stay with the sensation, I can stay with the feelings, I can stay present, basically. Then that's a success, because it will find completion if it's in its own time when we're able to do that. And like all of this, it's very, very loose. It's just a bit of a framework for our practitioners and and trainees and stuff to go off. Like I wouldn't suggest anyone tries to follow this really robotically and to the point and stuff, because we really want this to be an art form. We want to keep the humanness intact. It's sort of like we stay with our client. We're not worrying about, oh, am I up to discerning emotions or anything like that. It's, we're there with our client. That human aspect is really there. And then, agenda goes out the window and we can actually throw this whole thing out. But this is just a sort of basic framework for people to start to understand how this process works.
Absolutely. And then just finishing the session, which is the last point at the bottom there, is we're just kind of wrapping up what we've gone through. We're thanking the body for whatever it has brought up today. We can actually bring people back into their resource. If we check in with their nervous system and they're a little bit activated, then we can come back to their resource, which we started the session with, because we always want someone in a nice resourced state before they leave and before the session's over. And that they might feel in that nice resource state after processing what they've been through, or we might need to just use that resource. Like I said, it's that thing that we can always come back to, that foundation of EP. So that is the EP flowchart. We hope that has all made sense, just jumping into each individual part more and more. The only thing we didn't touch on was the emergency regulation measures. These are the small things that we can do as well as the resource. If the client dips into overwhelm at any point of the session, we can use any one of these 5 or a multiple just to start down regulating the nervous system so we can move forward. Once again, there's many kind of safety nets and things in place when it comes to EP. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Pleasure as always, Matt.
Thanks, Ryan.
Bye.